How can faith help you when the safety net is pulled out from under you vocationally? We'll be talking to Matt Mosley, a sports journalist, about just that on Good God. Stay tuned. Welcome to Good God, conversations that matter about faith in public life. I'm George Mason, the host, and I'm pleased to welcome to the program today Matt Mosley. Matt, glad to have you with us again. We've had a conversation about some things about your faith journey, and today I'd like for us to talk a little more about the direction of your vocation. Matt is a podcast personality here in Dallas, Fort Worth, and I'm sure it goes all over the country, Matt. The Doomsday podcast, it's called.
Yes.
You and Ed Werder have this Doomsday podcast, and it's not predictable when you drop an episode, is it? It kind of, maybe during the Cowboys season, it's an every week thing.
Yeah, it is. You know, with the Cowboys, you never know because with so much Zeke Elliott, you know, his off season, I mean, that gave us a whole series of shows.
Right.
And so there's always something that could happen or a player being suspended. So we have to be ready to jump into action. But you're right. During the season, we get on a little bit more of a schedule.
Well,
yeah, I think you're someone who needs a schedule more than I do.
Well, Sunday's always coming, Matt, you know, for me. And so I am used to a deadline and a schedule, and there's no leeway about that.
No.
Sunday morning is going to arrive.
That's what somebody told me about radio one time, that because I was on, and I've been, you know, and I don't know how much news I want to break on here, but I'll give you a little bit. But I've been thinking about, and I've been doing some other kind of radio projects, but kind of like you're talking about with your sermon. I remember somebody saying, 3 o'clock, it comes every single day. And I remember just the excitement at first. I'm on the radio. Right. And then at some point, it's kind of like these people who, you know, do these Broadway musicals and everything. It happens every single night, and you have to get up for it. And so every day at 3 o'clock, that red light would come on, and it was time to go. And much like those, you know, Sunday sermons.
That's true. And so you did that 3 o'clock hour first with Randy Galloway, the GAC show, Galloway and Company, and then it became your afternoon show, cleverly titled, by the way, afternoons, sort of like the ballpark in Arlington.
There you go.
Sort of generic, but you and Kalishoff for a while. But it's interesting to track your career. So Dallas Morning News, sports writer, and then you move into radio and continue to write at the same time as you're doing radio. And then the industry just keeps changing, right?
Yes.
I mean, the newspaper industry changes, the sports radio industry changes, and you find yourself doing podcasts. Talk a little bit about the insecurity that represents, the vulnerability it feels like in the industry itself, where the sure institutions are not there for everyone anymore.
Yeah, and I think the scary thing is, there's so many people laid off. I mean, Ed Werder, my podcast co-host on Doomsday, and don't forget I do one with Brent Musburger. You Are Looking Live. You know how Brent starts every broadcast, and that's the You Are Looking Live podcast. But the day we started Doomsday was the day Ed Werder was laid off after 20-something years at ESPN. And I mean, you know, once somebody's at a place for that long, you sort of think, well, they're going to be there forever. And I thought that's probably what Ed thought. And so I thought, well, this is a disaster. And it probably, in looking back, is they allowed him to do something like my podcast. They probably already knew they were going to lay him off. And that was why he was allowed to do it. But the second podcast ever, we had somewhere around 50,000 downloads, mainly because people were interested in hearing Ed's side of the story. Now, Ed continues to, I've told Ed, I don't think people need to hear any more about this. At some point, you know, we sort of move on but Ed's been a great partner in this, and you're right. It is, I've had the whole industry change on me a couple of times, and what happened with the internet, newspapers weren't ready for it. They didn't know how to handle it. They didn't know how to sell. They gave all the stuff for free, and then they tried to take it back. Then they tried to make it free again, and it just, you know, for years, the profit margins on newspapers was just enormous. And then the price print or ink. All the stuff went up. And the internet just changed everything overnight. I remember when I left, I didn't leave the morning news. I started writing columns for the DallasNews.com, which is part of the morning news, and everybody thought I was crazy. Right. How could you leave the paper? Because there was still that thought.
Sure.
People of your generation, and we're not that far apart, but I mean, it's
my generation. I love that's right. Yes,
that's right. We're very close.
Gray hair. That's right. Yeah. Okay.
But I'm just saying, there's still that. And I'm still I grew up in the newspaper business, so I love holding the newspaper, but it's just crazy.
It is.
I'm in my 40s now, and anybody my age and younger, they just barely even get any kids. I've got a little 10-year-old daughter. I mean, she's seen a newspaper just because I still get one.
Right.
But most of them don't even have any clue. So that happened, and when I went and did all the internet stuff, it was great for my career, but people thought I was crazy.
Right.
Leave... all this newspaper, you're in the paper all the time.
Right.
And even like my in-laws and my parents, people in Kaufman County where I grew up, wait, I thought he was in the paper. It's like I have to, almost retrain everybody. You've got to look on the internet. It's okay. But I think people almost felt, Matt's career's not,
But it's an interesting thing to look at how industries change. It's sort of the old analogy of the Buggy Whip company, that used to have horse-drawn carriages, and this is what we do. We're the Buggy Whip company, that makes these. And then cars come along, and instead of thinking about being in the transportation delivery business, they're still in the Buggy Whip business.
Yes.
And then suddenly things change, and it's hard for people to reinvent themselves, to anticipate where these changes are happening and to get ahead of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And to be part of that new wave.
It is, and and I think it's even hard. I think about you and the church and trying to anticipate, okay, how do we reach out to people? How do we do this on social media? Yet, we also have this part of it's just like, hey, put your social media down and just have a relationship with somebody. And it's like, where does it end?
Well,
it's
right. It's always the opportunity and the opportunity cost of that technology change, right? So on the positive side, many Sundays before I even get back to my office, I have a text from Matt Mosley saying, nice work this morning, and it's an encouraging thing, and I appreciate you doing that. But on the other hand, there are people who are making the choice to stay home and watch on live stream and not be in the pew with their fellow Christians, and it's just easier that way, and it's leisurely. On the other hand, there's a woman I recently visited who's now deceased, and she was thanking me because the past few years she's watched on live stream every Sunday morning and felt a part of the church, and she wouldn't have 20 years ago. She would feel sidelined and lonely and not part of her congregation. So how do you put all of that together in a way that continues to nurture the community and the faith of people, and yet doesn't give people an excuse not to be part of the flesh and blood community, right?
I think it's extremely hard, and nobody has all the right answers. With podcasting, why I got excited about it is what I started to realize. I think we sometimes get into this thing where we think about millennials. How do we reach the younger folk? And I mean, you've had it happen in ministry. How do we get these people while taking care of our folks that have been here forever? And what I've realized, I have a gym I go to. I know you can't really tell, but I go to the Cooper Fitness Center, and I just love it up there. And I've got a lot of mentors up there. There's guys in their 60s and 70s who just have done incredible in business and all. And I've just had it's you talk about a place of, like, I don't know what you would call it. It's just an unbelievable. My wife and I have different thoughts on working out. She goes up there, gets her workout in, and can be home in like 30 minutes or something.
Right.
And she wonders why it takes me like 4 or 5 hours. It's like, really?
Yeah.
You need to be in the steam room that long?
Right. I'm picking up tips, and all these very successful people sharing stories.
Yes.
That's right.
It feels like it feels like a place for networking. Although I never do anything. I just meet extremely interesting people. But podcasting. I find that even people, and the reason I brought that up is because people 60s, 70s, 80s, they are loving the on-demand nature of that. The fact that they can get it anytime.
Right.
And it's just radio, while I love it, and there's still some radio stuff that I do kind of on the side. If you miss it, you miss it. If you miss an interview, they might podcast it. But the radio, it's kind of like you're saying, the Buggy Whip kind of thing. They're kind of like, if we podcast everything, aren't we hurting ourselves? They're still thinking kind of like a newspaper.
Right.
Should we still wait on our scoops in the newspaper, or should we put it online? I mean, that was the longest debate.
Right.
People were still waiting. When do we put the breaking news up? We'll put it up immediately.
Right.
And you can still get credit for it across the country, but it just people weren't thinking like that. So with podcasting, what I find that it's not just kind of a young man's game or young woman's game. It's for everybody. And the thing about advertisers that love it is that I can sort of just work it into a podcast and mention them and do it in a way that, okay, we're not going to go take this commercial break. I mean, I could hear the people punching out when we went to it. Just, I could, in my mind,
so instead of taking a break in between our conversations here to promote a nonprofit, I should just, under my voice, be saying Wilshire Baptist Church, 4316 Abrams Road. By the way, we're glad to have you on Sunday morning. Is that kind of the way we do it? So I got to.
People don't even know what happened.
Just subliminal. It's just like that. Okay. Well, there it is.
That's why advertisers love podcasting.
Okay. Very good.
Reason.
Well, all right. So podcasting is so easy once you get the hang of it, and you say it's not necessarily younger people, but I will say that there is a little bit of a learning curve for some folks to just locate it on their smartphone, or how to connect in the car, or to get online on their computer. It is still not the traditional sources. Right?
It's not. What I do is just grab people's phone, like at church or whatever. They're like, wait, what is this thing you do? Like this one guy, my neighbor, who's this highly successful criminal defense attorney, he's like, now how do I get your blog? I'm like, it's Ted, it's not a blog. It's not a blog,
it's a podcast.
Yeah, he calls it a blog. But on the iPhone, that iTunes thing is just
podcast.
Right there. And then you just do the search. I mean, people are sort of shocked because I think they're so used to things being a little difficult that when you show them, okay, this is not that difficult. And then once they subscribe to the Good God podcast,
there it is, Good God podcast on Apple Podcasts.
You have them forever.
Google Play, and all of those other sources. Thank you for the plug there, and that's another example of how this can be done, I suppose. So podcasting though has allowed you, it seems to me, to really use your voice in a way that's native to you, that you don't feel as obligated to an organization or to ESPN or to some larger group. You get to kind of design your voice and the program the way you want to.
Yeah, and it is, people would say to me when I left radio, they said, well, you have a really good brand. And I'd never thought of myself in that. I mean, I guess we all should maybe think, the George Mason brand, it's out there, we should maybe think in those terms. Mm-hmm. No, it is. You have a brand and so I did think through, okay, what do I want to build? What should this thing look like? And I'm still working with it. And I've been fortunate, much like you have, that some partners it's just amazing. Right. It's one thing, you know how to ask for money because you have to do it like almost a weekly basis,
Yes, and not often enough, That's right.
But I'm just saying, I don't have any experience with that other than trying to raise some money for the YMCA, and I'm just horrible at it. I'm just like, I'll finally at the last minute, whatever my goal is, call I'm still like call my parents, hey.
Your wife, on the other hand, is a natural.
Oh my gosh,
she hit me up for
millions,
something, and I just thought, well, of course, Meredith is asking, so write the check.
Yeah. Well, you made the mistake years ago, I think, of telling somebody, or you've made it public.
I have
that if someone comes to you, you try to give.
I say yes. If I can, if it's at all possible, I say yes.
And I try to follow your lead.
Good.
And
Thank you.
Every football player who shows up selling some Hershey's bars or whatever, I'm like, okay,
very good.
Just 20s fly, it is. But speaking of this brand thing and trying to put it together, it's been It's been a frustrating experience at times, but there is something about like when you work for yourself and when you realize it's sink or swim time. It's not based on somebody else or some of these ratings. I mean, I guess we're all still tied to ratings. You need people to download and all that kind of stuff. But yeah.
Well, let's talk about what that means working for oneself, because one doesn't actually ever fully work for oneself. You know, there is a sense in which we're all part of this work together. So let's talk about that when we come back from the break.
All right.
The YMCA of Metropolitan Dallas welcomes neighbors each day to make sure everyone, regardless of age, income, or background, has the opportunity to learn, grow, and thrive. The YMCA's annual campaign enables the Y to provide free or discounted memberships and programs to the people who need them the most, making our communities safer, stronger, and healthier. The Y has always been a place of possibility and a promise for all.
We're back with Matt Mosley. Matt, you were talking about your Doomsday podcast, and let's not forget, yes, you have another podcast with Brent Musburger.
Yes, You Are Looking Live.
You Are Looking Live, okay, and that's pretty much a sports gambling podcast. Is what it is?
Yeah,
Brent?
that's right.
That's right. Anyway, but we were talking about how, in a sense, this represents self-employment and how you get to direct this and whatnot. But you still have an audience, and you still have investors. We're always working for someone, right? Not just for ourselves. So when you think about this broadcast that you do, this podcast, what is the audience that you have in your mind, and how much do you think about them, and do you say, what I really want them to hear today is?
Yeah, I think with like a Cowboys show, you know, what can we do to differentiate? There's a lot of folks talking about the Cowboys out there. The head start we have, there aren't a lot of great. There are some. I mean, I don't want to say we're the only, what I think is a really good Cowboys podcast. They're out there. But what can we do that no one else could do? So what we try to get for our audience is, hey, we're going to pull back the curtain. We talk to people within the Cowboys, you know, insiders, that kind of thing. And then I'm always, and I think that's why it's a good mix with Ed. Ed is actually kind of a witty guy. But when he gets on the air and when he's talking, he gets very serious. And so I tend to try to break him up. And so, I want some mixture of what can we bring them. And we try to get great guests, much like you have. Exactly. Right. But just, you know, how can we entertain and inform at the same time? And that's what I've always done. I mean, I tried to, in my writing career, I've tried to find a niche at the Dallas Morning News that just didn't really exist. I thought if I wrote like everybody else and covered a team, like I just kind of do that the rest of my life, it'd be a fine career. But if I could actually, I don't know what you'd call it, sports humorist. I mean, I liked Dave Barry. I read him. Barbara, my mother-in-law, also a member of Wilshire. Barbara Floyd. I mean, she sort of introduced me to him. I think I knew about him from his days, you know, in Miami. And you probably ran across, you know, some of those columns over the years. Yeah. And there was just, to me, he had such a distinctive voice. And so I just thought you've got to go a different route if you're gonna. And so that's what I did. And I had a guy who didn't, at the morning news, named Bob Yates, who I don't even know if he totally got me, but he just thought this guy has something different and just let me go with it.
So I think that's an interesting point about vocation too, and that is that when you're thinking about what you do with your life, part of it is, of course, what's possible that people care about, right? And part of it is also, who are you? Right? How do you put together your sense of humor, your angle on looking at life, the personality that God gave you, and what people are looking for and needing? When that comes together, there's a beautiful match. But the process of finding it is also sometimes a challenge.
And I'll tell you this, and you've seen this in ministry, it's difficult when you feel like you're connecting with your audience and you're getting the feedback and you're not connecting with a boss. I mean, I've had those issues. Now, I've had great program directors. I've had some GMs I love, so I don't want to paint it like I am difficult to manage because I'm pushing back, and so for some people, I'm not for everybody on that front. But that was tough. That was probably when I left this last radio thing, that was the toughest thing in the world, because I thought I had developed and cultivated an audience that I sort of connected with, and the new people who bought the station just didn't have any appreciation for that. I didn't feel like. So, you have to make a decision when somebody offers you a nice, hefty pay cut. Do you say, okay, it's important for me to keep going, in which a lot of people have to make that decision. I mean, maybe that was looking back to what I should have done, but I was just like, no, because once you do that, then they have you.
Okay, so how did your faith factor into being able to make the decision to venture forth without a safety net? I mean, to move from security into this much more fragile world and make your way. Was this just because that's the way you're made, or was it also because there is a faith component in this?
Well, a pastor at Kaufman years and years ago, when I was trying to make a difficult decision, I think it was relationship-wise even, it was like sometimes God speaks through your gut, and that has been the way with me a lot of times. And part of it is looking back and going, God, when the whole law school thing happened, I mean, and people say, well, how do I get into journalism? I'm like, don't do what I did. I mean, it's just crazy, but it worked out, and I remember when I left radio. I think I just had faith that this whole career, somehow things, trusting in God, and just trusting that things are going to work out, it has worked out.
Right.
So this seems like the right thing to do right now. And I remember I read a book. It's just funny when you're kind of going through some job stuff. People, they'll start throwing books at you. I'm sure you've had people hand you books, and there was one.
The stack is really high.
Oh, I know.
All the time.
I know, and you actually read some of them. Yeah. There was a guy, because I was I was kind of fascinated when I first left in this coach search business. I was like, how do these guys? What is this guy? And there's a guy named Bodine that does that, and he'd written a book called Two Chairs, and it resonated with me a little bit, because I was just kind of like, man, I really need this time. And my buddy Tyler Cooper, of Cooper Fitness fame, he and I went to college together. We're fraternity brothers. He sent me off to San Diego. They had a place on the beach there. Where do the Navy Buds train? Whatever that is, Coronado. Del Coronado.
Right.
And so he said, I think you need to go and be alone for a bit. And maybe just decompress. And this was a couple of weeks after I left radio after 10 years. And I had just read this book called Two Chairs. And so for whatever reason, I needed something in that moment that was really a little more physical than just the meditation. And so where you're sitting, I would sit in a chair, and I would just like talk to God, and like had a moment where, and then the hard part is you can talk and talk, which I'm good at, I have a lot of practice, but that's the listening. Okay, you sit back, and how comfortable can that be to look at an empty chair and try to have that.
Right.
But at that time, that sort of was a good thing for me to sit there and try to listen and hear, and not, but the competitor in me. Right. And that's why I mean, you probably had moments like this. There's an opportunity I have probably a year or two down the road. There's probably an opportunity to get in an ownership group in a radio, and that kind of thing. And what I constantly ask myself is, like, would that just be sort of getting back at some, would it be for the right reasons? Do I really miss it that much? Or would it, and those are the things I kind of go back and forth. And so in that moment after I left, I had that competitive side of me, is like, I want to go get a job the next day. I want to bring that old radio station down. I want to, I had to just, and so it was a good time for me, because I got away from it. And then those days when I got back to Dallas, and it's just weird to do something. It's like if you just, left Sunday, man, your program's like playing football. When it's Sunday at 11 or Sunday at 8:30, boom, you're on. What time is early service? I don't come to that. That's too early. But yeah, you're just conditioned to do all that, and it's just strange when suddenly it's not there. So what I did is jumped on my bike and went around White Rock Lake, and talk about a sanctuary that became. So when it was time for me to go on the radio, that's what I did every day, and I rode about 18 miles and got on my bike, and that's been good.
I think these are spiritual practices that put us in touch with God, and most of the time, people don't have experiences where they sense that God audibly speaks to them, but for many of us, when we're actually trying to listen, there is a sense in which we come away from it feeling that God has given us messages of peace and security and confidence to move forward. I like to say that it's not that when we are people of faith, Christians, that we come away with a relationship with God where we say, "Okay, God told me everything's going to be okay." But I think what God says is, everything may not be okay, but you're going to be okay in it. And once you hear that, then you can go through those times that aren't so good because you know that you're going to be sustained through it, and it's not going to last forever. So yeah. Well, I'm glad you've been able to make that transition. I just think that there are a lot of people, whether it's in law, and the law business has changed because it's actually moved from being more of a profession to more of a business. And that's been difficult for people to manage that as well. Newspapers and journalism and ministry. Everybody seems to be in a process of transition and trying to struggle with how to manage the vulnerability of all of that with families and a sense of identity. So your experience is a good help to others, I think.
Well, I hope so. And it's just, well, when you're out there and you're just kind of searching, for what's next. I mean, you're right. It does feel vulnerable, and you're just used to having that sort of position of strength, whether it be the radio or writing for somebody or whatever. And so, yeah, I think for me, the podcast and sort of getting the reins of this thing, not that we're ever truly in charge, but it's been a fascinating experience.
Well, I want to thank you for being a faithful church member, too. We don't talk about this all the time, but everyone should probably know that any chance you get, you're in the pew on Sunday morning, and you're part of the church, and you're even right now on the personnel committee. So I need to be really kind to you because you're in charge of my future and all of that. But thank you for your faithfulness to the church, and you and Meredith and your daughter Parker are great, contributors in every aspect of the church. I appreciate it.
Well, and I appreciate you and the church and your friendship, and it's it's an amazing place, and these are crazy times that we're in, and it's nice to be able to come to a place, and right. Even your sermon recently, boy, you moved people they were coming up to me,
Oh, really?
Yeah, telling me about it. So,
okay.
The David and Goliath, that was,
yes,
that one,
very good.
Yes,
well,
it really resonated with folks, I believe.
Yeah, I think it's a great inspirational story for us, and we have to be careful with it because we'd all want to be David all the time, right?
Yes.
And we have to be careful not to be Goliath, but just to know that there's an unseen presence in the world, that when we're standing for justice and being compassionate to stand with people, that God is present with us and working with us. So thanks for all your witness and the ways that you practice your faith, and quietly but persistently and consistently as well.
Well, I appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for coming. Okay.
The YMCA of Metropolitan Dallas welcomes neighbors each day to make sure everyone, regardless of age, income, or background, has the opportunity to learn, grow, and thrive. The YMCA's annual campaign enables the Y to provide free or discounted memberships and programs to the people who need them the most, making our communities safer, stronger, and healthier. The Y has always been a place of possibility and a promise for all.